Mr. Morrison, are you capable of speaking in a complete sentence? The voice of Judge Albright echoed with thinly veiled contempt in the sterile, cavernous courtroom. It was a voice accustomed to being the loudest in any room, a tool sharpened by years of unquestioned authority. He leaned forward over his polished oak bench, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, peering down at the old man standing before him. Roger Morrison did not flinch. He stood perfectly still, his back as straight as a man half his age, his hands clasped calmly behind him. He was 84 years old, a man built of quiet angles and weathered patience. His jacket, though clean and pressed, was decades old, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. It hung loosely on his spare frame, a relic from another time, much like the man himself. "Yes, Your Honor," Roger said. His voice was not loud, but it was clear, like stones smoothed by a river. Judge Albright sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation for the sparsely populated courtroom. "Then I suggest you use one. The charge is failure to comply with Municipal Code 3B regarding property maintenance. The prosecutor has presented evidence of an overgrown lawn and a deteriorating fence. How do you plead?" Roger's gaze was steady, fixed not on the judge but on the American flag standing in the corner of the room. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecutor, a young man named Peterson with an ambitious glint in his eye and too much gel in his hair, scoffed quietly. He shuffled his papers, the sound sharp and irritating in the tense silence. "Your Honor, the defendant has been issued 3 separate citations over the last 6 months. He has ignored all of them. The city's complaint is straightforward. His property is an eyesore and a violation. His refusal to engage with the proceedings is, frankly, insulting to this court." Judge Albright tapped a pen on his desk, a rhythmic, impatient beat that set everyone's teeth on edge. "I am inclined to agree, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Morrison, this is not a difficult concept. You are accused of neglecting your property. The city wants you to clean it up. What is so complicated about that?" Roger Morrison remained silent for a moment, his calm a stark contrast to the judge's mounting frustration. He seemed to be looking past them all, into a distance no one else could see. The courtroom wasn't a place of judgment for him. It was just another room, another place to be patient. He had learned patience in places where a single rushed second could be the difference between life and death. A judge's peak was nothing compared to the waiting he had endured. "I was not able," Roger said finally, his voice still low and even. "Not able," the judge repeated, his voice rising. "What does that mean? Are you infirm? Are you unable to care for yourself? You seem perfectly capable of standing there and defying this court." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and cruel. The judge was painting him as either a stubborn old fool or a senile man who needed to be managed. A few people in the public gallery shifted uncomfortably. They saw what the judge saw, an elderly man being difficult. They didn't see the rigid set of his shoulders, the discipline that held him erect when most men his age would be stooped. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" the judge pressed. "Any explanation at all? Or do you plan to stand there in silent judgment of us all?" Roger's eyes shifted from the flag to the judge. For the first time, a flicker of something moved in their depths. Not anger, but a profound weariness. He had seen men like Judge Albright before. Men who mistook silence for weakness, stillness for stupidity. They were the loud ones, the ones who always had to have the last word. They never understood that the most important things were often left unsaid. "My wife passed away 6 months ago," Roger stated, the words simple and unadorned. "I have been occupied." The statement offered no apology, no plea for pity. It was a fact, plain and simple. For Roger, it explained everything. For Judge Albright, it was an inconvenience. "Condolences, Mr. Morrison," the judge said, his tone dismissive, as if brushing a piece of lint from his robe. "But personal matters do not exempt you from the law. The law applies to everyone equally. 6 months is more than enough time to hire a landscaper." The prosecutor, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward. "Your Honor, if the defendant is admitting he was unable to maintain the property, perhaps that is an argument for his guilt, not against it. It speaks to a level of neglect that the city cannot tolerate." The legal maneuvering was lost on Roger. He was thinking of the overgrown lawn, of the way the wild roses his wife Eleanor had planted were now climbing over the fence he had promised her he would fix. Every uncut blade of grass, every peeling slat of wood, was a monument to his grief. He couldn't bring himself to change it, to erase the last vestiges of the life they had shared in that yard. How could he explain that to a man who saw only code violations? "Mr. Morrison, I am losing my patience," the judge snapped, his voice now a whip crack. "You are wasting this court's time. I am asking you one last time to address the charge. Why did you not maintain your property?" Roger thought of the long nights, the empty house, the silence that was louder than any screaming. He thought of his promise to Eleanor to keep her garden just as she left it, a wild and beautiful memorial. He could not put those things into words that this court would understand. The truth was too heavy for such a small, sterile room. So he simply said, "I had my reasons." The prosecutor threw his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The man is openly defying you." Judge Albright's face flushed a deep, angry red. "I agree, Mr. Morrison. Your contemptuous attitude is noted. I am trying to be reasonable here. I am trying to understand what is so difficult about this. Look at me when I speak to you. Show some respect." Roger's gaze met the judge's. There was no defiance in his eyes, only a quiet, unyielding dignity. It was this stillness, this refusal to be baited or broken that infuriated the judge most of all. It was a currency of character that his own power could not touch. He felt his authority slipping, mocked by the quiet resilience of the old man before him. He gestured vaguely at Roger's worn jacket. "What is that on your lapel? Some club pin? You think that gives you the right to stand here and disrespect my courtroom?" The object was small and unassuming, a simple blue enamel rectangle framed in gold. To the judge it was a meaningless piece of metal, another sign of the old man's eccentricity. But as the judge's dismissive words landed, the sterile hum of the courtroom faded for Roger. In its place came a different sound, a whirring pulse that he had not heard in over 50 years but could never forget. The thumping of helicopter blades beating against a sky thick with smoke and sand. The air, once cool and conditioned, was suddenly hot, dry, and filled with the metallic taste of fear. He felt the phantom weight of his gear, the familiar chafe of the straps on his shoulders. A young man's face, barely 20 years old and covered in grime, flashed before his eyes. It was Corporal Jensen. The boy was holding out the same blue pin. His hand was shaking, but his voice was steady. "You earned this, Captain. For all of us. More than any of us." Roger could feel the press of the pin against his uniform, a small point of pressure in a world dissolving into chaos. It was the last time he saw Jensen alive. The memory was gone as quickly as it came, a flash of lightning in the quiet storm of his mind. He was back in the courtroom. Judge Albright was still talking, his voice a dull drone, but the pin on his lapel now felt warm against his chest, a secret anchor in a hostile sea. It was not a club pin, it was a promise. In the back of the courtroom, a young man sat bolt upright. His name was Ben Carter, a paralegal for the public defender's office and a former Army sergeant. He was there to observe, to learn the rhythms of the court. But now, all his attention was fixed on the old man and the judge's angry outburst. Ben hadn't paid much attention at first. Just another municipal case, another citizen getting ground down by the bureaucratic gears. But he had noticed the old man's posture. It was a stance he recognized. It was the parade rest of a soldier, ingrained and unconscious. He watched the way the man stood, absorbing the judge's verbal blows without a single flicker of emotion, and a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He had seen NCOs in basic training try to break recruits who stood just like that. They never succeeded. When the judge mocked the pin, Ben leaned forward, squinting. He'd only ever seen one in a museum at Fort Benning. A small, simple blue rectangle. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. The Presidential Unit Citation. Awarded for extraordinary heroism in action. It was one of the highest honors a unit could receive. A cold dread washed over him. The judge wasn't just disrespecting an old man. He was desecrating a sacred symbol. This whole proceeding felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. He watched as Judge Albright's face purpled with rage, his voice rising to a shout as he threatened the old veteran with contempt charges. Ben knew he couldn't just sit here. He had to do something. He rose silently from his seat and slipped out the side door into the hallway. His hands were trembling slightly as he pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over a name he hadn't called in years. It was a long shot, a crazy idea, but it was the only one he had. He pressed the button. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "General Miller's office." "This is former Sergeant Ben Carter," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need to speak with the general. It's an emergency." "The general is in a meeting, Sergeant. I can take a message." "No, you don't understand," Ben insisted, his voice cracking with urgency. "Please, just tell him they're about to hold Captain Roger Morrison in contempt at the county courthouse. Tell him it's the ghost of Sector 7. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The aide's professional tone vanished, replaced by stunned silence. Ben could hear a muffled exchange, then the line clicked. A new voice came on, a voice that carried the weight of command even through the tiny speaker. It was a voice Ben had only heard once before, addressing 1,000 soldiers in a dusty airfield hangar. "Carter? This is General Miller. Say that name again." Ben's heart hammered against his ribs. "Morrison, sir. Captain Roger Morrison. Judge Albright is about to throw him in a holding cell." The silence on the general's end was more terrifying than any shouting. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously calm, like the air before a tornado. "Stay where you are, son. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Ben leaned against the cool marble wall of the hallway, his legs feeling weak. He had just thrown a grenade into the middle of a quiet courtroom. Now he could only wait for it to explode. Inside the general's office at the nearby military base, a mahogany desk sat beneath photos of handshakes with presidents and foreign dignitaries. General Miller, a man whose sharp blue eyes had assessed battlefields on 3 continents, stood with the phone pressed to his ear, his knuckles white. The color had drained from his face. He hung up, the clatter of the receiver unnaturally loud in the silent room. His aide, a young major, looked up from his computer. "Sir, is everything all right?" "Clear my schedule for the rest of the day, Major," the general said, his voice a low growl. "Get me my car and a full dress uniform. Now." "Sir, we have the briefing with the congressional delegation at 1400. "The delegation can wait," Miller snapped, his eyes blazing. He was already shrugging off his jacket. "They're trying to put a living legend in a cage. They're trying to humiliate the ghost of Sector 7. The major froze, the name hitting him like a physical blow. He was a history buff, a student of military lore. Every soldier knew the stories of the ghost. A ranger captain who, during a brutal forgotten conflict, had held a strategic pass alone for 3 days against impossible odds after his entire company was wiped out. His actions saved the lives of hundreds. He was a figure of myth, a whispered name spoken with reverence at military academies. No one knew what happened to him after the war. He had simply vanished, refusing all publicity, fading back into the civilian world. "My God," the major whispered. "He's alive? He's here? He's in a county courtroom being torn apart by some 2-bit judge," the general bit out, his voice shaking with a cold, controlled fury. "And we are going to fix that. Move." Back in the courtroom, Judge Albright had reached his breaking point. Roger Morrison's quiet dignity was a mirror reflecting his own petty tyranny, and he could not stand the sight of it. He slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack making everyone jump. "That's it. I have had enough," he boomed, his face a mask of indignation. "Mr. Morrison, I have given you every opportunity to engage with this court respectfully. Your silence is contempt. Your demeanor is an insult to the laws this nation is built on. I hereby find you in contempt of court." He pointed a trembling finger at the bailiff. "Bailiff, take this man into custody. He will spend 48 hours in the county jail to reflect on the importance of respecting our legal system. Furthermore," he added, his voice dripping with spite, "I am ordering a full competency evaluation. Clearly, he is not fit to manage his own affairs or live independently." It was the ultimate overreach, the final, unforgivable humiliation. He wasn't just punishing the old man, he was trying to strip him of his autonomy, his very identity. The burly bailiff, a man who had looked uneasy throughout the entire proceeding, approached Roger slowly. "Sir, I'm sorry," he mumbled, his eyes downcast. "You have to come with me." Roger Morrison did not resist. He simply turned, his shoulders still straight, and prepared to be led away. He had faced far worse than a holding cell. He had endured more than this judge could ever imagine. A quiet resignation settled over him. This was just one more thing to endure. The small crowd watched in stunned silence, the injustice of the moment hanging thick and heavy in the air, a poison that no one knew how to purge. Just as the bailiff's hand was about to touch Roger's arm, the great double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a sound like a thunderclap. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright light of the hall, stood a figure of immense and immediate authority. He was a 4-star general, in a pristine dark green Class A dress uniform. Medals and ribbons covered his chest in a rainbow of valor. On his shoulders, 4 silver stars gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Flanking him were 2 equally imposing military aides. The general's presence sucked the air from the room. The judge's jaw dropped. The prosecutor froze mid-scoff. The bailiff's hand fell back to his side as if he'd touched a hot stove. The quiet hum of the courtroom was replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a pressure against the eardrums. General Miller strode into the room, his polished boots clicking on the linoleum with the sharp, rhythmic cadence of a man walking into battle. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the prosecutor. His eyes, like chips of ice, were locked on one person and one person only, the old man in the worn jacket. He marched down the center aisle, the crowd of spectators parting before him as if by an invisible force. He stopped 2 feet in front of Roger Morrison. In the deafening silence, he brought his heels together with a sharp crack. He raised his hand in a salute so crisp, so precise it seemed to cut the air. It was a gesture of profound, absolute respect. "Captain Morrison," the general's voice boomed, clear and strong, resonating with a power that the judge's gavel could never hope to match. "It is an honor, sir." Roger looked at the general, and for the first time that day, a glimmer of recognition of a shared and distant past warmed his tired eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Judge Albright, finally finding his voice, sputtered from the bench. "General, what is the meaning of this? This is a court of law. You have no standing here." General Miller slowly lowered his salute but did not turn his back on Roger. He addressed the judge by turning his head slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerously low and cutting tone. "Your Honor, the man you were about to place in a cage for an unkempt lawn is Captain Roger Morrison, United States Army Rangers." He took a step to the side, placing himself between Roger and the bench, a human shield of honor. His voice rose again, not in a shout, but with a declarative force that commanded the attention of every soul in the room. "This man who you have accused of disrespect is the sole recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions during the Battle of Hill 734, a battle, I might add, that is still classified. He holds 2 silver stars for gallantry, 3 bronze stars for valor, and 4 purple hearts for wounds received in action while refusing to be evacuated. He single-handedly held the northern pass at Anlock for 72 hours, saving the lives of over 300 men who were cut off and surrounded. His men called him the Ghost because he was the only thing standing between them and certain death." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. People were pulling out their phones not to text but to record. The prosecutor's face had gone the color of ash. Ben Carter, watching from the doorway, felt tears welling in his eyes. The general pointed a finger at the small pin on Roger's lapel. "And that club pin you so casually mocked, Your Honor? That is the Presidential Unit Citation. It was awarded to his company for extraordinary heroism. Captain Morrison is the last surviving member of that company. He doesn't wear it for himself. He wears it for the 17 men who died by his side, men whose names he can still recite from memory." The general finally turned his full body to face the judge, his stare so intense it felt as if it could crack the polished oak of the bench. "You sit there behind that seal and you demand respect for your robe. This man earned his nation's eternal respect with his character, his courage, and his blood. He has stood before enemies far more terrifying than you, and he never once faltered, and you dare to question his fitness and lecture him on compliance?" Judge Albright was speechless, his face a mottled canvas of shock, embarrassment, and dawning horror. He looked as if he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. The general turned back to the old soldier. His voice softened, filled now with a gentle reverence. "Captain, on behalf of a grateful nation, I apologize for the indignity you have suffered here today." Roger Morrison finally spoke, his quiet voice cutting through the electric silence more effectively than any shout. He looked not at the general, but at the utterly broken judge. "It's all right, General," he said, a weary grace in his words. "The man is just doing his job. He sees a world of rules. I saw a world without them." He then looked directly at Judge Albright, his eyes holding not malice but a deep, sorrowful wisdom. "Sometimes the quietest people carry the heaviest things. You just have to be willing to listen for what isn't being said." As Roger spoke those words, a final image flashed in his mind's eye, a memory that was the bedrock of his silence. He was on his knees in the red dirt of a blasted hillside. A young soldier, his uniform torn and blood-soaked, was dying in his arms. It was the boy who had given him the pin. With his last breath, the soldier had pressed it into Roger's hand. "Don't let them forget us, Captain," he'd whispered. "Promise me." Roger's hand had closed around the pin, a silent promise made in a crucible of loss. His silence in the courtroom wasn't defiance. It was a vigil. The general gently placed a hand on Roger's shoulder. "Let's go home, Captain." He led Roger down the aisle, the bailiff and everyone else stepping back as if royalty were passing. The crowd was on its feet, a spontaneous display of respect. As they reached the doors, a single person began to clap, then another, and another, until the entire courtroom filled with the sound of applause, a thundering apology, and a long-overdue thank you. In the aftermath, the story exploded. The video clips filmed by spectators went viral. The judge's office was flooded with furious calls. Within a week, Judge Albright was suspended pending a full review by the Judicial Conduct Board. The city quietly dropped all charges against Roger Morrison and sent a crew from the Parks Department to tend to his yard. an unspoken act of contrition. In response to the public outcry, the state legislature passed a new initiative mandating sensitivity and awareness training for all court officials in dealing with combat veterans, a program they named the Morrison Mandate. Weeks later, a man in simple civilian clothes walked into a small, quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. He saw Roger Morrison sitting at a small table by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee and looking out at the street. The man hesitated, then took a deep breath and approached the table. It was Albright. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Roger looked up, his expression unreadable. I wanted to apologize," Albright said, fumbling with his words. "In person. What I did, the way I treated you, it was inexcusable. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." Roger looked at the former judge for a long moment, studying the genuine remorse in his eyes. He then simply nodded toward the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, son," he said, his voice as calm as a quiet lake. "Tell me about your day." Roger Morrison's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest heroes are often the ones who walk among us in silence, their valor hidden beneath a quiet exterior. Their battles are long over, but their honor remains. If you were moved by this story of quiet strength and overdue justice, please like this video, share it to honor all our unassuming veterans, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that deserve to be told.